So here we are in a second line day. We're in gate 60, the gate of acceptance, the gate of limitation, and the second line is called decisiveness. We know that second lines are hermits and they don't like to be distracted. We know that they are very visible to us, and because of this visibility, we can see that they are caught in a limitation, but they don't know that. So when you knock on their window or their door and you call them out to it, they can be really uncomfortable because the moment they realize that they're being limited, they will have a totally different reaction to it than when they were ignorant of the limitation. Ignorance, as we know, is bliss. When we get to the second line, we get to the line of projecting outwards. The 60 in the second line is projecting outwards that they can accept limitation. Now, most of them can suffer a great deal from the pressure in their life. Remember, that is just a projection of the nature of this hexagram going out. It doesn't necessarily mean that they really are accepting the limitation. They're just projecting outwards that they're accepting the limitation. In the exaltation, the understanding of the nature of limitation, to accept its restraints when necessary, and thus be able to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. Energy which can adapt to restraint. You're not necessarily doing them any favors when you try to awaken them to their limitations. On their own, they may do things that appear to others to transcend that limitation, but they don't know that. They're always having others watching them do that in that sense, but it's not something they recognize about themselves. Second lines don't recognize the quality that they're projecting out. They need others to call it out of them. And it can be a hell of a surprise or a shock, even when someone calls you out for something. Yeah, I don't have that. I don't know what you're talking about. And then you come face to face with it, and it's like, oh shit. So it's a really interesting process, either being a second line, I'm a second line, I'm a 2-4. And so being called out for things is really, yeah, it is at times, it's like, be gentle when you're calling out a second line because they don't always know what you're talking about. Basically, these people are projecting out that they're restrained. They don't know that there is anything at the other end of the channel. So every once in a while, somebody breaks through that. And then they have a doorway to that limitation. Generally speaking, these second lines are always going to be restrained, and in that restraint, in accepting that limitation as a projection, there can also be the deep melancholy inside. Why am I accepting this limitation? Is this limitation really of any value? Is this limitation taking me in the right direction? Is this limitation the mutation that is necessary for me? In the detriment, an adaptation to restraint that becomes habitual and maintains the nature of the limitation even when it no longer exists. The energy for adaptation that can get stuck without eventual mutation. Through the channel of mutation, the 360, and also the channel of mating, which is the 59-6, we have all kinds of very important genetic things that go on in terms of how we derive our genetic chromosomal mix from our parents. And of course, second lines represent recessive fields, yeah. That is a gene that suddenly comes to the surface. And if it matches that in its resonance to the third line, there can be, no, the third gate, sorry, there can be a mutation of that gene. What you have here is this getting stuck with a specific limitation and holding on to it and not mutating. And this is the whole thing to recognize about this second line. Because it projects out that it will accept the limitation and be restrained, the exalted side is always open to the possibility that the limitation will end. And then it will seem like, aha, to accept the limitation was the right thing to do. When you come to the other side of the energy for adaptation that can get stuck without eventual mutation, the limitation suddenly gets taken away. So you could imagine someone living in what used to be West Berlin, and every day they would go for a walk, turning around when they got to the Berlin Wall. And then the wall came down, and still every day they go for their walk, the same walk, and they turn around at the same place, even though there's no wall there anymore to stop them. They do not cross that point. The limitation is gone, but no mutation, no change of the path, no change of the way. There's is the other side of that second line, and there can be a deep addiction to the limitation in this second line. You might look at it as these are people who are addicted to their medicine even when they don't need it anymore because the illness has passed and they are healthy. So the grounding is coming from gate 56, of course, in the second line called linkage. This is a classic second line, and it's one of 6 lines of genius. It talks about recognition, and we know that all second lines need recognition. They have to be called out, and it is here that genius gets called out. And whilst it is in the genius to be able to stimulate others, to get them to believe in you, because this is gate 56, and through genetic continuity, some of that will rub off on the second line of gate 60, and the recognition and the calling out of the limitation, and perhaps the potential genius of being able to accept the limitation. The moon has been in gate 40 since 347, the ego gate of aloneness, also called deliverance. The next transit sees the moon moving into gate 64 at 1441. This is the gate of confusion. It's the abstract head gate that is fortunate enough to be followed in the wheel by its harmonic gate 47 at 1:42 tomorrow morning, the gate of realizing, of making sense of the confusion. This is a really magic pairing in terms of the journey in the wheel. It's not something that we find anywhere else. The abstract circuit works in the time frame of the past, pulling in past experience, reflecting on it, being confused by what it all means, and then making sense out of it, before eventually it gets expressed through ideas and stories when we get to the 1156. So this is the second line of gate 60. Thank you very much for joining me. Tomorrow I'll be back with the third line, and tomorrow is a double Sunday. So there will be 2 reports tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you then. Go gently.